Hello and welcome to Building Tomorrow's Insurer, where we explore the cutting edge of insurtech and digital innovation in the insurance industry. I am your host, Nigel Fellowes-Freeman, and today we are chatting with someone you may have already heard of, Michael Waitze. He is a titan of the content world, especially within tech, especially within insurtech, and he is the host of Asia Tech Podcast. He's no stranger to the industry on a broader sense. He's spent, I think, a couple of decades working with giants like Citigroup, Morgan Stanley, and Goldman Sachs. And his day job now is spending his time interviewing founders, CEOs, upcoming in fintechs and insurtechs, primarily in Asia, but I think globally as well. And today we are going to go really deep. We're going to try and go and understand Michael's brain, what he thinks, what he's seeing, what he finds is most interesting and exciting in insurtech, maybe some of the trends he's seeing, and lastly, really trying to understand what does he do differently? What should we be thinking about in terms of content as folks in the supply chain of insurance? So, Michael, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
It is my complete pleasure, and let's just hope I can live up to that unbelievable introduction. But thank you. It's great to be here. I'm not often on the other side of the mic, but I think I'm going to enjoy this. Go ahead. How can I help you?
It must be strange to be on the other side, and maybe that's a really nice place to start, which is you've got an interesting story, the story that took you to maybe what you're doing now. And I think if we can frame the conversation in understanding your story, then I think that'll be a good place to jump from. And so maybe you could just take us there. Where did that couple of decades of financial services work come from, and how did you end up being the podcaster you are?
These are really good questions. Let's go back to 1985 or 1986, just really quickly, right? I just sat in like a career forum, and some guy said, "Oh, I just came back from an internship on Wall Street," which I'd never heard of before. I grew up super poor, so I didn't even know that the stock market existed. I didn't know what was going on there. But this guy came back to school, and he was like, "You got to do this." And if you go work on Wall Street, you can make in your first couple of years like 75 to 100 grand a year. And I was like, that sounds like something I could possibly do. I was an economics major anyway, so I went and did that. And one of the other things that I did, which was really prescient, was I studied Japanese when I was in college. And it was kind of accidental. And I always say this, I feel like, and feel free to interrupt me at any time, right, to jump in and ask me questions about it. But I feel like I was born on the exact right date and the exact right time to take care of the sort of internationalization of the financial services system, right? Because if I'd been 5 years earlier, there would have been no Japan market to go to. Nobody would have gone. And if I'd been 5 years later, Japan would have been mired in the beginning of one of the longest recessions and stock market losses ever. And yet I just happened to get there just at the right time. Sorry, go ahead.
Do you think that's Japan on its own, or do you think that Asia as a whole in terms of that kind of that timing?
So it's a really good question. I would ask you, how old are you?
I am 39, soon to be 40 in about 10 days.
I'm going to hang up now because you're too old to talk to. So I'm almost 20 years older than you. So from your perspective, it may look like it's Asia in general, but back then it was really just Japan. It really was. Even the Chinese market was so nascent that we invested in, I remember investing in options in some Chinese companies, went to zero. The Hong Kong market, when I arrived in 1990 in Tokyo, Morgan Stanley was shutting down its Hong Kong office. And it subsequently opened up again a few years later. But that's how much interest there was. And you have to remember this too. When I arrived in Tokyo in 1990, the Imperial Palace, right, so the place where the Emperor of Japan lived, was said to be worth more than all of the real estate value of California. This is how big the bubble was. And for people that weren't involved back then, you can't understand, right, because you weren't there. But even back then, it was impossible for me to get a taxi in Tokyo because they thought that I lived in central Tokyo. So they were like, for 500 yen or for 600 yen, why am I picking you up? I'd rather pick up somebody that lives 40 kilometers away and take a 10,000 yen bill. So yeah, things were different back then, and it was really just a Japanese thing. That's changed for sure over the last 30 years.
And is that what's kept you in the market? Is the change, the rapid change you've seen over the last kind of 20 years?
I mean, I hate to say this, but I was a unicorn back then because I was a foreigner that spoke Japanese and that was interested in being in Japan and that wasn't constantly trying to tell Japan, why aren't you more like the West? Because a lot of guys and gals came over for like 1 or 2 years, and all they did was look at the surface level representation of what Japan and the Japanese market looked like. And I believe really strongly, actually, and this has guided a lot of the way that I operate in Asia, is that culture is embedded in language and in food. And if you don't eat the local food and you don't speak the local language, you cannot claim to understand what's going on there, because the nuance is in the expressions that people say around you. Well, I'll give you a perfect example. Right? If I say to you, if you're sitting in a meeting with a bunch of Japanese people and you say, like, what do you think about this thing this proposal that we're doing? And they say, let us think about it. Kento sasite kudasai. Let us think about it. What it really means is, no way. There's no way that's ever going to happen. But good try. But if you walk out of that meeting thinking, they said, let us think about it, then you'll go home thinking, I potentially have a deal. But these little nuances, if you're not sitting in the meeting and listening and understanding that stuff, and this is true in Indonesia, in Malaysia, in Thailand, and to a certain extent in Vietnam and even in Singapore, if you don't know those nuances, you're just out of your depth. And I think this is true if we go to the insurtech market, the fintech market, all these places. You have to understand the nuances to understand the bigger message. Is that fair?
Yeah, it's really fair. In fact, I was just in London just last week, and I caught up with one. We're doing a bit of work in Europe now, and we got some folks in the Netherlands. And as part of needing to get a visa in the Netherlands, you have to pass a Dutch exam, and that's a written, speaking, and reading exam within a certain couple of years of being in the country. Otherwise, you get fined. And I just thought, in terms of assimilation, what you just mentioned, in terms of being in a country and understanding the nuances of it, I thought that was a really interesting way to kind of drive that home within in a country of making sure that folks who are living there assimilate with the country. I thought it was an interesting point of view.
You have to, yeah.
Can you take us, Michael, that next step? So you in Japan, you know the language, you eat lots of the food. Now you decide to create a media company. So how was that jump? How did the jump go from financial services into media? Take us there.
In 1995,
okay,
a guy who used to work at Microsoft. So this guy, and I want to get his name right. Darn it. We'll find it afterwards. Anyway, this guy tried to convince me. He was an executive at Microsoft, and he said, look, the internet is going to give people the ability to create their own content. And he said, what we should do, this is, I think, before Microsoft started doing MSNBC, which most people don't know that, like, the MS in MSNBC actually stands for Microsoft.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Look, you didn't know, right? So they originally started this because they thought the media business was going to be a big deal. And this guy at Microsoft tried to tell them that they should build software to enable people to do this. And he built something called Real Player. And it was first audio, and then it was video, and then he built a company called Real Networks. He left Microsoft because they wouldn't let him do it internally, right? And when this thing came out, I was like, now technology is starting to move into a place where my own media aspirations, which I've had since I was a kid, can now be played out because the technology is cheap enough or affordable enough for me to be able to do it, right? So like the studio where I'm sitting right now would have cost millions of dollars to build before. I mean, even if you just think about it, like that mic you have, that's a dynamic microphone, yeah? You couldn't have bought that 15 years ago. No. They didn't make it for you, right? Even the headphones you have are better than the headphones that like your uncle had. You're just way better. I'm sitting in front of a green screen. All this stuff is just enablement, and it's all made available through technology, but also because lower costs, yeah? And as soon as I saw that, remember, this is in 1995, I started thinking, how can I have my own TV channel? But back then, the bandwidth and the throughput of the internet just wasn't fast enough or robust enough. I had a dial-up 56K modem, which even you probably don't know what that is.
I definitely, I can remember the moment that I heard that screeching sound, and I can remember the exact moment, and I think looking at the first kind of few pages, and it really opening my mind of, wow, this is in my little mind at the time. It was however old I was, kind of 10, 11, 12, taking books and seeing books online. That was kind of what the thing in my mind. I was like, wow, this is a view into me being able to access any information, which was interesting for me.
Right. So that's when I started thinking about this. But as the technology kept evolving, and as you have to understand like the confluence of events here, one of the things that we did at Morgan Stanley, at Goldman Sachs, at Deutsche Securities, and frankly, even at Citigroup later, was use technology to make businesses more productive. And one of the things we did was we would build something called algorithmic trading, which was really just using artificial intelligence and machine learning to make trading better and faster and more efficient. So if you fast forward to today and you think about what every fintech, what every insurtech is trying to do, they're trying to do something that we did 20 years ago, right? So my idea was, how do I take all the tech that's enabling media, right, to then have conversations about what's happening in the Asian markets on a platform that I can build myself now because it's relatively inexpensive enough to do that. And here's the other thing too, and I'll share a story with you because I think this is kind of interesting. I was sitting on the trading desk in Tokyo, and this must have been in like the end of the 90s, yeah? And one of my clients in New York said to me, because it was at night for him, right? He was a night trader. And he said to me, "Can I ask you a question?" And I was like, "Sure." He said, "Do they have microwaves in Japan? Microwave ovens?" And I'm like, okay, let's not make fun of them. Let's just figure out what's going on here. And I said, "Do you have a microwave at home?" He said, "I do, and I can actually see it from where I'm sitting." I said, "Okay, well, what's the brand?" And he said, "Toshiba." So I said to him, "Where do you think that comes from?" Right? Because To means east, and Shiba is just the name of a town. Higashi Shiba, like Toshiba, it's like right over there if you're in Tokyo. And I was like, that's a Japanese brand. So there's this idea that like, no matter how powerful and no matter how innovative Asia was back then, and even today, most of the world doesn't know and doesn't understand. And because China now it's like such a singular market, and it overwhelms people's understanding of what's happening in Asia, but it's also very insular and very domestic. So the only opportunity for me felt like, how do I talk about the rest of Asia and let the rest of the world know what I've learned? And again, getting back to this thing, I'm not Asian per se, but I've lived in Asia almost as long as you've been alive and longer than you've been sentient, really. Right? So yep. I feel like I'm a unicorn in that sense. And not in an arrogant way, but just in like, wow, I feel lucky to have this thing. How can I share it? And I think that was the genesis of, how do I build this media company? And can I say one more thing, if you don't mind?
No problem.
Mainstream media is at an inflection point where they're no longer in a position where they're actually telling stories. They're building their own narratives. And that means that if a CEO of a big company or if a CEO of a startup goes on to, I'll put it in quotes, television, like I'm going to use Bloomberg, and you can argue with me if you want to about this, right? They're going to get a 7-minute block. And that 7-minute block, because it's advertised TV, is probably going to be preceded by something about the war in Ukraine. And it's going to be followed by like an adult diaper commercial. And what that means is that whatever your message is going to get lost. So if you really want to get a message out, you should build your own media, right?
So I was about to say, I think the different forms of media that now exist, that maybe when you started, that pushing content and creating a media company has very much evolved. And when you think about it in terms of different lengths of content, what I mean by that is all the way from YouTube Shorts and TikTok, like all the way through to long form, Lex Friedman, like 3.5 hour pod. Like you can go from both extremes, right, in terms of being able to tell your message and share content. And I think that allows you then as a brand or as a media company, however you want to position it, to tell your message in the context and the format that you want to, exactly, in order to kind of reach the audience you're looking to get to.
But for me, I think that, so here's the story that I tell, okay? From 1985 until 2009, Apple participated in the Macworld Expo. 2009, right, again. So most people don't know this. And that event was run by IDG, which was just an independent event company. And in 2009, they went, wait a second, why are we going to somebody else's event and trying to shoehorn our story timing-wise, production-wise, quality-wise, into somebody else's event. And in 2009, they stopped participating. Steve Jobs just said, no, thank you. And that's when they started doing their own events in California, and they've never gone back. I don't even think Macworld Expo still exists, but I don't know that. And Apple has kind of been the bellwether in this for me. They decided 15 years ago that they were going to become their own media company. And I think every company should. Because like you said, whether it's short form, long form, or just like dancing on TikTok, if you want to tell your own story, you have to do it yourself. Right?
But do you think that the when you speak to a lot of insurance CEOs who hold the purse strings, who set the direction,
Yep.
And obviously the marketing teams that are generally tasked with creating and building the narrative that the players, i.e. the folks within the business, are part of,
Yep.
Execute in. Do you think that the CEOs give those teams the bandwidth to do what you're saying? You need to be able to give your teams the bandwidth to be able to make that jump.
So I'll ask you a question in reverse. I feel like my grandmother now, but I'll ask you a question in reverse. There are actually a bunch of things to say. The first is, what is the typical, let's look at one of the biggest advertisers in the world, okay? Do you know who it is? Procter & Gamble. They spend almost $10 billion on advertising every year. That's a lot of money.
A few dollars.
What's your favorite Procter & Gamble product?
Yeah. Head and shoulders.
Are you sure, though? But you had to think about it, though, for a second.
Of course, hey, did the $10 billion like hit the mark in terms of a brand? I suppose, but Procter are a holding company really for the brands that exist underneath it, right? In terms of
but again, but those sorry to interrupt you, but those marketing budgets are then parsed out probably from headquarters down to the rest of the brands. My point is that $10 billion. Here's the thing: do CEOs give their PR and marketing teams the right level of freedom or whatever support to do this? If they get why they're there, they definitely do. You have your own show, right? Why do you do it?
Well, the reason we created the pod in the first place was I was having a bunch of interesting conversations with super interesting folks, whether that information would be really useful to the world, and how could we then package that in a format to be able to kind of give it to folks. And so that was the premise for it. But I guess the question I'm asking more specifically is, specifically with insurance, and I'd like to focus on insurance a little bit here, which is,
go for it.
Are the top 50, top 100 insurance companies in the world have the belief that you do, which is they need to be a media company as well as a risk company?
So I think they're on their way there, and I'll tell you why. What are the biggest trends in insurance and insurtech right now? So I think that two things are really, well, three really, but we don't have to spend a lot of time talking about generative AI and AI because I think it's still pretty nascent. But two overriding things are very important. One is partnerships and distribution really matter in a way that's different than before. And the second thing is embedded. And those two things are combined with each other, right? Because you want to have a great partnership so then you can embed insurance into what those partnerships offer. But if you're an insurance company, right, and it doesn't matter to me how big or how small you are, you need to create relationships with new distribution channels, new e-commerce channels, right? Cybersecurity, all these things, you need to create new partnerships with them. What's the existing mechanism to do that? And again, I'm not asking you, I'm telling you. The existing mechanism, you just start making phone calls. You set up massive sales teams, you start making phone calls. Go for it. What I think, and what I feel like we've unlocked as a media company, and the reason why I think that big companies, insurance companies in particular, but all companies in general should be media companies is because watch this. What if I call you and instead of saying, I want to build a new partnership with you, what if I just call you and say, hey, I do a show called like Embedded Insurance or Building the Future of Insurance. You want to come on my show? How many people say no to you?
I can tell you the list is reasonably short.
But in percentage terms, I'm guessing it's above 90% people say yes.
Oh, yeah, that's what I mean.
I know.
The short is very few say no.
Right. So very few say no. So then do you do a prep call with everybody?
Virtually everybody.
Right. So everyone does a prep call with you, and then they get to learn, like, this Nigel Fellowes-Freeman dude's pretty smart, and he's not selling me anything. And then you schedule, and then you have your assistant come on. She's great. I think she should have her own show, frankly. She's
Yeah,
awesome.
I agree. I'm pushing her towards it. She'll get there.
And I've already told her that, so you know that, and I'm sure she told you that. But my point is that, like, once you do the prep call, they leave the prep call going, oh, this wasn't the thing that I expected it to be, and Nigel's pretty smart. And then you do this, you do the recording, and during the recording, you get to ask them things about their business you could never ask in a sales call. Because now they trust you. And then the more, here's the thing, so for a lot of companies, whether they're insurtechs or insurance companies, like, we don't have the time or we don't have the budget to do this. I say to them, you have a sales budget and a marketing budget. Try doing the show and tell me the show doesn't have a high ROI. And once you understand that the show itself has a return on investment, you'll do more shows. Because it's
and do you think yeah, it's a simple equation, but do you see folks doing it? That's the question. Like, in terms of do you see insurance companies building their own brands from a content generation perspective?
Yeah.
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 Super interesting. And do you think it's the same globally? Do you think there's local geographics to it?
I don't think the geographics matter at all. I think all you have to do is get the right people involved, and once they understand it, and whether that's in, it doesn't matter, actually, the geography. That's what we found, at least. But here's the reason why, again, I'm a unicorn in a way, right? Because I've seen, like, I have 20 years on you, so I've seen like 4 more market cycles than you've seen. So I know what's coming, not because I'm smarter than you. You're probably way smarter than I am. But I've seen more than you. And I'm just using you as a proxy, not for Nigel himself, right? That's not what I'm saying. But I'm just saying, I told you I was super lucky and super fortunate to be born at like just the right time. And I think that in every stage of my career, I've kind of been in the right place at the right time to do the right thing. And I was also born with a really decent voice. So if you close your eyes and listen to it, people enjoy that. And then if you can tell a story around it, whether it's for a big incumbent insurance company, for an up-and-coming insurtech, or frankly, for one of the biggest media networks in the world, there's a belief there. And also I've been doing this for 7 years now, right? And to the extent that I had a great career before that in finance, and if you believe 2 things at scale: one, that money just drives the global economy, and that technology also drives it, so the 2 of those things combined, if you can have a conversation about both of those things at scale, you win. And very few people can do that. Sorry, go ahead.
No, you're not at all. I was going to jump in and say, so can you give me a 3-5-point plan of how MGAX is just kicking off? They listen to this and they go, and you know what, this sounds like a perfect thing I need to get into. Mm-hmm. I need to create my own content. I need to create my own media business. Like, what are the 5 things or 3 things, or like, you choose the number that we can use for the title of the pod, because that'd be perfect. The 5 things that you'd need to do to create your own media company.
So the first thing I think you'd do is talk to somebody who can help you do that. And I'm just going to shamelessly say, like, we know how to do this. We've done it at scale in a bunch of different places, right? So call me. That's the first thing. And frankly, if you call me and don't want to work with me, go find somebody else to do it. But definitely don't try to do it yourself, because that's not your business. And can I just detour for a second? Sure. This is the secular change that's taking place in corporates globally. And that is, they're looking at their internal operations and thinking, what are our core competencies? Is human resources really our core competency? And they say, no, let's hire DEL, D-E-L, to outsource all of our HR stuff to. Because they now can do this globally in different regions and different locations, and we don't have to then open offices everywhere. We can let them do it for us. It's the same thing that Xero did, right, for accounting. All these little places inside of your company, you're abstracting out these functions and functionality, and then you're giving it over to somebody else, because it's way cheaper for us to do it for you than it is for you to do it internally, right? Because we already have scale and we know how to do this. And it's not just in the media space, right? Xero is maybe the first example of this, but DEL is just one of the most recent examples. That's the first thing. The second thing is don't use messaging defensively, right? Don't wait for your CFO to get involved in some backdated option thing. Always be out there telling a story about yourself that's positive. And I'm not talking about propaganda, right? But if I just went on the internet and started telling stories about Nigel, I could make you into anything I wanted. And then you'd have to go out and defend it. But if you're already been telling stories about Kanopi and about Nigel, and I come out and start saying, like, this is actually the truth, it's going to be hard to make people change their minds. And getting back to this thing I said before about, like, Bloomberg, why are you ceding your storytelling to this big company that's not on your side and doesn't understand your business? You should do it yourself. That's the second thing. Third thing is, so understand what your message is. Third thing is, be on every platform. Figure out how you can get on every platform that's relevant for you. The fourth thing is identify the new partners and your existing partners that can help you tell that story the best way, and work with them as closely as you possibly can. And you want to hear like another secret. There are probably 5 or 6 of these. The fifth one is, and we did this at the Singapore FinTech Festival last year, go to an event and then co-opt the event. Don't speak on stage. Nobody in the audience is listening. But the energy at the event is great. Record at the event. Bring a 3-camera setup. And before you get to the event, organize it with like 5 to 10 of your potential partners or your existing partners. And tell stories from the event around the themes of that event about why. Energy is already high. Right? And the other thing is, and I can keep going on and on about this, but then the last thing is, keep doing it. You know this. Your first podcast, your first whatever you publish, no one's going to watch. Your mother won't even watch it. Your little sister won't watch it. Your dog won't watch it. But keep going, because most people will give up when they get like 1 view on their first video.
Isn't the stat is it over 90% quit before kind of five pods or something like that?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you know how many recordings I'll do this week alone?
Good. Give me a multi-choice, please. Give me a multi-choice answer.
257.
Ooh, always go the middle. I'm going to go 5.
7. But yeah, but my point is that but I have tons of shows. India Game Changer, right? I have Insurance for the New Possible. I have Life at Scale, InsurTech Amplified, the Asia InsurTech Podcast, the Asia Tech Podcast. All of these shows that I do. And I'm always recording something for one of them. And the thing is, most people will give up. Like you said, 90% or 95% of the people will just say, like, oh, no one listened to my first 3 episodes. Never mind. Because they're missing the reason, they're missing the point of why they're doing their show.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Michael, we're going to take a little step left, if we can.
Go for it.
And obviously, you've just given us a sense of the quantum and also the depth of folks that you speak to on a regular basis. And I know a lot of our listeners are very interested in what's happening within Asia, but don't really have a line into it in terms of a content line in, unless they listen to your pod, of course. But if they don't, and they're not listeners, I want to go into a little bit of the market there, if that's okay.
Go ahead, please do.
So you mentioned kind of 5 or 10 minutes ago around embedded Gen AI and partnerships and distribution being these kind of 3 critical channels. Obviously, there are two primarily that we care a lot about here at Kanopi. But I'm interested in what's the themes that you're seeing in those 3 spaces, and maybe we can just touch on one at a time, and maybe you can start with embedded. What are you seeing in Asia? What are you seeing from the CEOs that you're speaking to that you're seeing change? Obviously, it's been something that's been around for a little while, but never really hasn't got to scale in some areas of the world. And so what are you hearing from the founders and CEOs that you speak to around embedded and then partners and distribution?
So I think those 2 things have to go hand in hand. Mm-hmm. And let's talk about them this way. Embedded insurance has almost always existed in the travel industry, right? People have been asking forever, if you fly, do you want to have insurance for your flight? But there was no sort of easy way to make it available and accessible, right? And I want to get back to this word accessibility as well, because I think that's also a big issue's the wrong word, but a big topic in Asia. Right, because the number of people that actually use insurance in any way, shape, or form in their lives is way smaller in Asia than it is in the rest of the world, which I'm sure you're aware of, right? So what's happened over the last 10 or 15 years in Asia is that you have these big digital platforms, whether it's ride-hailing companies, new fintechs that are coming out, gig worker associations. There's a business, and I can't remember the name of it off the top of my head, in India that has 250,000 gig workers on its platform. And every time I talk to the people that are running those companies, I say, at some level, I think every company that has a big following or lots of customers is at some level going to have to morph into a fintech. Okay? My wife was on the phone this morning for 20 minutes waiting just to get in touch with her bank to ask them a simple question about changing a password. Okay? So I don't bank with any regular banks anymore. But all of these individual new digital platforms, like I said, whether it's ride-hailing platforms, gig worker platforms, if you think about the platform that Jingjing is building in Singapore around house cleaning, at some level, all of these people are going to be transacting money. And if they're transacting money and having products or services given to them, they're going to need insurance. So I think the biggest difference now is these digital platforms. And I think that every smart insurance company, incumbent insurance company, is saying to themselves, how can we create technology that allows these digital platforms to connect to us in a way that's seamless, effortless, and at a point of sale that makes sense? So relevance is also really important. So that the insurance just becomes part of the purchasing process. And that also, how can we add value, whether it's in a small way or a large way, early on in the process, so that people understand the value of insurance, particularly in a region where insurance penetration is low. Right? So I think those are the things, and those are big topics, and I think those are the things that are really key. And I think that one other thing has changed in the past 5 to 7 years, and that is this, that insurtechs have stopped saying that they're going to disrupt the insurance industry and start to say they're going to enable it. Because if you don't have like a $40 billion balance sheet, good luck. Right, just good luck. And if you poke a smart bear, that bear is not going to kill you. He's not going to run at you. He's going to run away from you and build whatever you're trying to build. Or he's going to look at your solution and say, let's work together with these guys and gals because they've built something that we want to build and it's already there. Let's work with them together. They win and we win. And in those win-win situations, I think incumbents are super happy to deal with insurtechs that have built tech that they want to build.
I just want to go into that particular point just a little bit, which is partner versus build. I think what we have seen, particularly over the last maybe just 2 to 3 years, that's started to evolve a little bit in terms of some lessons learned and some attempts to self-build has lessons been learned that's been very hard, expensive, and maybe their culture within some of the incumbents it does not have within it in terms of people, process, technology to be able to create some of that technology stack to do it. Yep. So you've seen the partnership evolve and become more and more an approach to take versus build. Is that what you're hearing and seeing too? So
you said you want to make a little turn to the left. I'm going to make a little turn to the right.
You got it.
Because I want to give you another story and another example of this. And I think this is one of the big benefits of having like a long view on experience. I want to get the name right. Reed Hastings is the CEO of Netflix, yeah?
Yep.
Netflix was originally a business that rented DVDs and sent in red bags DVDs to people. But they knew their vision was always, we want to be a streaming company, but again, the throughput and the compute wasn't strong enough or fast enough for them to be able to do it. But when they reached that tipping point, again, for lack of a better term, where the tech started being able to do the things they wanted to do, one of the things that they didn't do, unfortunately or fortunately, was move people from the old deliver the DVD business, right, into the digital business because the skill set was completely different. So they literally sold that business, essentially not firing, but just like getting rid of all those people, and then hired a whole new management team to run the digital business because the skill set there was completely different. And this gets back to the conversation we were having before. What's your core competency? Because now Netflix's core competency is not sending DVDs to your house. It's giving you digital distribution at scale and having no lag time. So if you're an incumbent insurer, you have to look at yourself and ask, what is our core competency? Can we create the digital product and the digital distribution mechanism that we think is necessary to do this? And do we even understand it? Or should we partner with somebody because then we can do it in a way that's more effective and more efficient, right? And that's the big question. This has always been the question. When I was at Goldman Sachs, we had to make a decision. We actually had gone out and bought a trading system, which I contended when I arrived was terrible. I mean, terrible. And then we developed one internally. So we made a reverse decision. When I was at Deutsche Securities, we did the reverse. We went out and contracted and built an external trading system with another company. It was a startup. But you just have to ask yourself, what's your core competency? I think some of the big incumbents are really great at building tech and also understanding that like the people that they need to do that have to be different than the people that were there to run their older systems, their legacy systems, right? So it's not the answer you wanted, but it's definitely what's happening in the market.
And that's the answer I wanted. I think that the answer we wanted is what we're seeing. What's the truth? What's actually happening? What's happening day to day? And I think that, like you say, there's the change feels like it's accelerating.
It is.
And partnering doesn't have to be a one-way door too. Like there's
No.
It almost, I think about decisions often in two ways, which is one way and two-way doors. And I think partnering is a two-way door. You can kind of walk in and then you can come back out the door, and you always go down the big build route, which is often a one-way door, I think. But partnering doesn't have to be that, and so I think it does give you optionality and ability to try and learn, and where does the organization need to execute, and what are the lines you want to execute in. There doesn't need to be all in all or nothing. You can the businesses are big, the product lines are big. There's no reason you can't do both.
So I'll ask you a question. How many insurance licenses do you think exist in Thailand right now? The country where I live. It's 70, unless they've taken some of them away. But I would say that 5 or 6 of them are with big incumbent insurers. That means you have 60 companies or more that cannot build their own technology because they're just too small. Those should be huge markets, potential partners for insurtechs that are building. And yet most insurtechs are looking at big incumbents and saying, I want to slay an elephant, right? But if like 75 people are trying to slay the same elephant, by the time they get there, it's just going to be like a raw, terrible carcass, yeah? But if you're going after the market, but if you're going after a market that nobody else is going after, in what I'll call the SME and SMB side of the market, they need tech and they're never going to be able to build it themselves. And that's true of all of Southeast Asia, for sure. Yeah.
And when you think about Southeast Asia generally, you mentioned Thailand there, we mentioned Singapore a little bit earlier on, and the breadth of the market there. When you chat to insurtechs that are in multiple markets throughout Southeast Asia, how do you feel about the nuance required? What do you hear about the nuance required per market? You mentioned right at the top of the call around Japan and the need for language and nuance and having a conversation, understanding the nuance of the conversation.
Yes.
And does that inherently make it challenging for companies to be able to work in multiple markets through Southeast Asia, or is there a way and an approach that you need to take to be able to do it?
Yeah, this actually in a way ends up being a human resources problem, right? In other words, you can't have a Malaysian lady running the business in Indonesia. You can't have a Singaporean guy running the business in Vietnam. It just doesn't make any sense. So you need to have somebody that has domain experience, but also country and culture experience there, but also somebody that's open-minded enough to say, I never thought about it that way, right? And that potentially has the ability to partner with, as we said before, some of these big digital distribution companies so that they can then go in and talk to, and remember, every market's different, right? So if you look at individual markets in Southeast Asia, a lot of the economy is run by some huge companies, right? So like in Thailand, if you're not partnering with CP and the True Group at some level, you're missing a huge opportunity. Well, I don't know the names of the companies per se in Indonesia, but it's probably pretty similar, right? In Vietnam, it's probably more, it's probably less concentrated. But I think the key is having people on the ground that understand how this stuff works, and also to understand like how insurance works. But also somebody who's digitally native, right? Because that's how all this stuff is going to get distributed. Because I think anybody over a certain age, at some level, they've already made a decision as to whether they need insurance as a product. But the younger generations there are trying to figure out what's the value to me of having insurance. And the value is definitely there. But I think it's incumbent upon people in the insurance and in the insurtech space to try to give them a message, which again gets back to this show thing. How do you communicate with people in the right way so that they can understand where the value is for them? Does that make sense?
It makes super interesting. And we've spoken about 2 of the 3. Spoken about partnering, spoken about embedded. We haven't spoken about the elephant in the room, which is Gen AI.
Yeah.
From the conversations you've had, day to day, the 7 that you're having this week, how is Gen AI specifically thinking about like purely on that front, LLM front, Gen AI front?
Right.
How are you seeing it within the insurance sector and the insurance conversations you're having throughout the Asian market?
Okay. I'm going to say something I think it's going to be really controversial, actually. It's like asking somebody what they think about TCP/IP, right? Or electricity. Should we use it? How's it going to change the way we work? It's just going to be everywhere, right? Like when you wake up in the morning and go into your kitchen and try to make some coffee, you just flip on a light switch and you have no idea how that works. But it's everywhere. Yeah? If you have a hybrid car, you just go in without even putting the key in the car and press a button and it turns on. All that's electricity and batteries. You have no idea how that works. And I think artificial intelligence, which has been around for 50 or more years, I told you we were using it 20-something years ago in trading. It's now kind of going bleeding, filtering out into the rest of the economy. I think Gen AI is going to be the same thing. I think we're going to stop talking about it in 3 to 5 years because everyone's just going to be using it for everything that they do, and it's just going to become part of the infrastructure. So I think that in the companies to whom I'm speaking on a day-to-day basis, those are the people, and here's how I know who's going to succeed and who's not going to succeed. Right? If you have a chief AI officer, you've already lost. Yeah? Because everyone's going to need to use it. But if you,
we can have some people looking for this, looking for new jobs. They're going to go, all right, scrub that title off my LinkedIn.
Yeah, but they should, because look, these are people that I call chasers, right? They're chasing the newest technologies. These are the same people. These are the same people that were chief metaverse officers 3 or 4 years ago. Right? And I'm not disparaging the metaverse. We're part of what's going to happen is that all of these things are going to merge together. Yeah, there's not going to be any virtual reality. There could be some dual realities, right? I had an unbelievable recording, which I cannot wait to release with a guy in New Zealand a couple of days ago who runs a company called Futureverse. You'll see when that comes out, but that was insanely great and very philosophical. But I think the answer to the Gen AI question is it's just going to be everywhere. It's going to be part of everything that we do. And in the same way that the internet created a huge scope of new opportunities and new jobs as well, I think that Gen AI is going to do the same thing, and LLMs are going to help us do them. Look, we've done this, and like I said, I've seen the cycles before. I think what's going to happen is for people that are really good at their jobs, it's going to make them great. And for people that were just middling, you're going to have to find another job. But that's not because AI pushed you out. It's because you were just middling at your job. And other people figured out how to do it. It's like, look, I know how to drive, but I would never get into an F1 car because I'd kill myself. But that doesn't mean that F1's going away just because I can't do it, right? And plenty of people that can't drive F1 cars can still have other jobs. They can be taxi drivers. And I just think that that's going to be true that's just true for technology at scale everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Is that fair?
It's absolutely fair. And Michael, I could talk to you all day, but I'm cognizant of your time, and I do want to ask a couple of questions.
Go ahead.
We've touched on it maybe just a little bit here. I think I may know where this goes, but let's go with it anyway. I'd love to hear your predictions for the future of insurance. I'm going to leave it as open-ended as that. Oh, actually, you know what? I'm going to close it down a little bit. Will collaboration be the ruler in the years to come?
be the ruler. So I don't want to be so pedantic as to say it's going to be the ruler. But I think the people that learn how to collaborate, and I think this is true in every walk of life, no one, here, I'll just put it to you this way, and I say this a lot, it's not the first time I've said it, it won't be the last time. No one succeeds alone. So if you're not collaborating with somebody, you're automatically losing because you're giving up opportunities that you don't know about. Somebody else already knows that they're there. And even if they don't, you can sell. Like I had a conversation again with a guy in India a couple of days ago, and he was like, ooh, we have 400,000 people on our platform. I never thought about serving them financial products, insurance. Can we talk about this offline kind of thing? So that guy's smart enough to understand that those kind of collabs win. So that's kind of my answer to that. I could go on and on about it, but I'm cognizant of your time as well. I wouldn't say it's the be-all and end-all, but if you're not collaborating, you're losing.
Yeah, fair. And where will we be in 10 years? Where are you going to be in 10 years, Michael? If we're going to have this conversation in 10 years' time, what's your world going to look like in 10 years?
The largest independent media company in Asia that everybody in the world knows about.
Put that on a post-it note, stick it on the wall and look at it every day. I'm sure it's already there. Michael, thank you so much. This has been such an interesting conversation. I've learned a huge amount. Hopefully everyone that listens to this will tomorrow be coming out building their own media companies, and we're going to see many more channels and distribution come to market. So thank you so much for everything. Thanks for the pod. Really enjoy listening to it. Keep on doing your thing.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks, everybody. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. I would highly recommend you tuning into Michael's Asia Tech podcast if you haven't already. It is one of the ones that I get notifications buzzing, and I always tune in and make the time. And so it's I cannot recommend it highly enough. If you do want to watch the video of this episode, jump onto YouTube. The link will be in the description below. And as always, if you'd like to hear more from industry leaders who are pushing the boundaries of insurance, please do check out our episodes of our podcast series, Building Tomorrow's Insurer.